From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, December 6. Anthony Albanese has proposed exempting giant salmon farms in Tasmania from federal environmental laws on a national interest basis. That's a scoop in The Australian, where we've been covering the stoush over a rare endangered fish species that could blow up the salmon industry. Peter Dutton says he'll cancel half the government's offshore wind zones, saying the giant turbines would jeopardise the environment, tourism and the economy. Both those stories are live now at theaustralian.com.au. Christopher Michael Dawson is appealing his conviction for the unlawful carnal knowledge of a 16-year-old girl who was his pupil in 1980. Dawson, previously convicted for the murder of his wife Lynette Sims, says he's not guilty and that the New South Wales District Court Chief Judge made errors of law in the trial. Today, Dawson's grounds of appeal. Before we begin, there's some swearing in this episode. Did you catch that? It's Christopher Michael Dawson in 2023, reacting to his conviction for having unlawful carnal knowledge of a teenager who was his student in the early 1980s. Dawson had already been convicted of the 1982 murder of his wife Lynette Sims, and he was appearing via video link wearing prison greens before the New South Wales District Court to hear Judge Sarah Huggett convict him of this second offence.
I am satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the accused committed the offence charged and find him guilty.
When Dawson thought the video link was turned off, he let rip with that string of expletives, clearly audible in the court. The complainant in this matter is a woman whom we can only identify as AB. She was the Dawson family babysitter in the early 1980s and was Dawson's student at Cromer High, where he was a sports teacher.
One of his favourite stories, and it might have been one of mine too, is that he'd seen me in the playground when I was in year 10, 15 years old, and he thought to himself, "Oh, I'd really like to get to know her. She's beautiful." It softened me. I felt special because he'd said that.
That's a voice actor reading the words of AB during her evidence at trial.
I just remember lying there, on the bed in anticipation, shaking. I was told to keep it a secret. Part of the grooming process, I would say, to get me to trust him.
Now Dawson, who has always denied any wrongdoing, is appealing the District Court conviction.
The verdict of guilt was unreasonable.
That's a voice actor reading the first of 4 grounds of appeal on behalf of Dawson. He'll be represented by barrister Stephen Odgers SC, a silk specialising in criminal appeals. This trial was all about timing. Exactly when did Dawson first have sex with the girl? She says it was in 1980, when she was 16 and a student in his class. Dawson admits he had sex with the girl while she was a teenager, but says it was the following year, after she turned 17 and was no longer in his class. He was in his early 30s. In early 1982, Dawson's wife Lynette disappeared, and AB moved into the family home. The pair later married and had a baby, then divorced. She later became a witness against him in both the murder and carnal knowledge proceedings, saying she was horrified by the dawning realisation that Dawson had murdered Lynette to be with her. That distinction in age is important because if Dawson is telling the truth, it wasn't a crime. The relevant law was that the age of consent for sex was 16, but there was a special exception for teachers and pupils. In that case, a female student had to be 17 to consent to sex with her teacher.
The trial judge erred in failing to take into account evidence relevant to the issue of the date sexual intercourse occurred, other than with respect to the credibility of the complainant.
These are Dawson's continued grounds of appeal.
The trial judge erred regarding the application of the burden and standard of proof. The trial judge erred in relying upon questions asked by defence counsel in cross-examination of prosecution witnesses as indicating the defence case.
The judge, Sarah Huggett, who has since been promoted to Chief Judge of the District Court, said this in her sentencing remarks, which the court allowed us to broadcast.
The victim did not tell anyone because the offender told her to keep it secret. The offence was committed in circumstances where the offender had engaged in conduct in the lead up to committing the offence that could be characterised as grooming the victim. This included taking active steps to become her teacher, singling her out for attention, including choosing her to attend a sports carnival, brackets, with another student, close brackets, during which he sat next to her and put his hand on her knee, which made her feel special, telling her she was beautiful and having her babysit in his home. This occurred in a context in which the offender knew the victim was experiencing trouble in her home life and that she was somewhat vulnerable. The offender also encouraged the victim to confide in him about her problems, and she came to trust him.
During the carnal knowledge trial, Dawson was at Long Bay. He initially showed up for court, but then asked if he could watch the trial via video link from jail, as it was exhausting to get on the prison bus in the pre-dawn hours with all the other prisoners attending court, not to return until well after dark. In her sentencing remarks, Judge Huggett acknowledged time in prison was draining for the now 76-year-old.
The offender's mental health deteriorated following his arrest and the associated media and public interest. He experienced a further decline in his mental health when he was admitted to custody on 30 August 2022, having been found guilty of the murder of Lynette Dawson. Although he reports experiencing taunting by inmates from neighbouring wings, apparently the inmates within his wing are supportive.
Huggett sentenced Dawson to 3 years. He's also serving 24 years for the murder of Lynette. Coming up after the break, what happened when Dawson appealed against his conviction for murder? Earlier this year, Dawson appealed against his conviction for murdering his wife, which had been delivered by Justice Ian Harrison of the New South Wales Supreme Court.
Christopher Michael Dawson on the charge that on or about 8 January 1982 at Bayview or elsewhere in the state of New South Wales, you did murder Lynette Dawson. I find you guilty. You may sit down. Mr. Dawson, it will be necessary for you to be taken into custody. You'll have to go.
Dawson won't get parole unless he reveals what he did with Lynn's remains, a new piece of legislation named Lynn's Law in her honour.
The evidence does not reveal how Mr. Dawson killed Lynette Dawson. It does not reveal whether he did so with the assistance of anyone else or by himself. It does not reveal where or when he did so, nor does it reveal where Lynette Dawson's body is now. The charge of murder in this trial is unsupported by direct evidence. The case against Mr. Dawson is wholly circumstantial. I'm set aside beyond reasonable doubt that the only rational inference that the circumstances enable me to draw is that Lynette Dawson died on about 8 January 1982 as the result of a conscious and voluntary act committed by Mr. Dawson with the intention of causing her death.
In his appeal against the murder conviction, Dawson's representative, Public Defender Belinda Rigg SC, claimed he suffered a significant forensic disadvantage because the trial happened so long after the alleged crime. She said evidence that could prove Lynn was alive after January 1982 had been destroyed or lost to time, memories had faded, and potential witnesses had died. A voice actor is reading the words spoken by Belinda Rigg in court.
That's a very clear example of a deceased person whose evidence was crucial. That very type of detail has been lost because of the delay.
Rigg also submitted Justice Harrison erred when he declared Dawson's lies demonstrated a consciousness of guilt. Although it took 40 years for Dawson to be charged, and although he fought it at every level and the trial itself stretched over more than 2 months, it took fewer than 2 minutes for the appeal to be dismissed by a 3-judge bench.
Chris Dawson is expected to die in jail, with one judge declaring there is absolutely no doubt he is guilty.
The Carnal Knowledge appeal will be heard on March 31, 2025. Thanks for joining us on The Front this week. Our team is Kristen Amiet, Jasper Leak, Lia Tsamoglou, Josh Burton, Tiffany Dimmack, Stephanie Coombs and me, Claire Harvey. Don't forget to come back over the weekend for another of our special arts and culture episodes. This time, we'll reveal what it takes to write an award-winning novel. And of course, join us anytime for Australia's best journalism at theaustralian.com.au.